When you think of ancient civilizations, which ones come to mind? Egypt, Greece, Rome. What about the Celts? They might not have left behind the same towering monuments as the Egyptians or the Romans, but they were no less powerful. In fact, when it comes to survival, they might have been even more successful. Welcome to my channel, and today we're going back to the Iron Age to explore the Geeks Part 2. Druids, gods, and the fall of a civilization. If you haven't already watched Part 1, go check it out now. Together, these two videos will take you on an epic journey through a world where warriors painted their bodies blue. Druids practiced shocking magic and women-led armies into battle. We'll explore their religion, their art, their battles, and even some of the secrets they kept hidden from the Romans. But first, let's talk about their language. We do and know for sure what language the Celts spoke, because they didn't leave behind any written records. Most of what we know comes from what other cultures wrote about them. So when it comes to names, places, and words, we have to rely on outsiders who didn't always get it right. It's like trying to learn about your family history from your nosy neighbor. You just can't trust everything you hear. Despite the challenges, scholars believe that the ancient Celts spoke a group of related languages called the Goidelic languages. This family tree includes the modern languages of Irish, Scottish, Gaelic, and Welsh. By studying these modern languages, experts have been able to piece together bits and pieces of ancient Celtic. Some words have survived in place names, others in modern Cornish or Welsh. For example, the name Avon is thought to come from an ancient Celtic word meaning river. This suggests that the Celts had a deep connection to nature, a theme that runs throughout their religion and beliefs. Speaking of which, let's move on to their religion. The Celts were nature worshippers. They saw gods and goddesses in the natural world around them. Think of it like this. When the Celts looked up at the mountains, they didn't just see rocks. They saw the home of the gods. When they heard the wind in the trees, they didn't just hear noise. They listened to the whispers of the spirits. This way of thinking was a big part of their lives. It wasn't just something they believed in, it was a way to understand the world around them. Some of their major gods included Dagda, a fatherly god associated with the other world, and sometimes depicted with a giant phallus. Law, a skilled warrior and craftsman who personified the sun. Bridget, a triple goddess linked to healing, poetry, and Now, unlike the polytheistic religions of the Greeks and Romans, very little is known about Celtic deities. Most of what we know comes from scraps of information found in written records from other cultures. Let's turn to the Druids, the Celtic priests, scholars, and advisors who held a lot of power in Celtic society. They were kind of like the wise men of the tribe, the ones who everyone went to for advice. These guys were super smart. They knew a ton about plants, the stars, and all kinds of mystical stuff. Instead of reading books, they committed everything they learned to memory and passed it down orally, meaning they told stories around a fire instead of reading dusty old scrolls. They memorized everything from religious teachings to laws to historical events. It's like being a real-life Gandalf, except instead of a pointy hat, they probably wore a cloak and carried a staff. Julius Caesar, the Roman general and statesman, described the Druids as the most respected members of their society, saying that they enjoyed greater authority than the nobility, and that even the kings were careful to do nothing that might offend them. As far as the Druids were concerned, there were no written rules. They followed the old ways, keeping their knowledge alive through stories passed down from generation to generation. They were also responsible for performing rituals and sacrifices. Honor the gods and goddesses of the Celts, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes these rituals involved human sacrifice, which isn't exactly pleasant. Overall, though the Druids were pretty chill, they weren't big on rules, and they loved sharing their knowledge with anyone who was interested. Now, here's the thing about the Greeks. Unlike the Greeks and Romans, they didn't build great monuments like pyramids or huge temples. Instead, they left behind mysterious stone circles, standing stones, and burial mounds. These sites are full of symbolism, and each one tells us a bit more about the culture, beliefs, and daily life of the people who made them. You might be wondering, what did these structures actually look like? Well, imagine this. You're walking through the countryside and suddenly you come across a circle of massive stones standing tall against the sky. Some are rough and weathered, while others are smooth and polished by years of wind and rain. Each rock monolith looks like a silent guardian, watching over the land with stoic dignity. In the center of the circle, you find a flat area, perhaps used for gatherings, ceremonies, or maybe even battles. And as you explore further, you stumble upon smaller stones and burial mounds hidden in the surrounding woods. These are the remnants of a rich culture, whispering tales of a time long past. But what about their festivals, their magic, and the traditions that still haunt our world today? Let's talk about some of their most shocking customs. One tradition that sets the Celts apart was the practice of having women warriors. Boudica, a warrior queen from the British tribe of the Iceni, is a prime example. When her husband died and his kingdom was supposed to be passed on to their daughter, Rome stepped in and screwed it all up. As a result, Boudica led a revolt, uniting tribes from across Britain and terrifying the Romans along the way. While she eventually lost the war, her bravery continues to inspire people today. Next, we need to discuss their head cult. Imagine living in a world where if you got knocked unconscious in a fight, your opponent could cut off your head as a trophy. That was the world the Celts lived in. It was normal for them to chop off enemy heads and put them on pikes or poles. They even had special words for it. The Gauls called it dispicari, which means to look down on, and the Britons called it impoded, meaning to strike terror into. For them, it was a way to scare their enemies and show how tough they were. Even the mighty Hannibal Barca, the brilliant Carthaginian general, wasn't safe from this gruesome fate. After he was defeated and killed by the Romans in 200 BC, the victorious Roman general Scipio Africanus paraded his head around the streets of Rome as a trophy. Talk about a wake-up call. Gold torques were another fascinating aspect of Celtic culture. These guys weren't messing around when it came to jewelry. A gold torque was a symbol of power and status, kind of like a crown or a fancy necklace. They were usually worn by important people like chiefs or kings. In fact, some torques were so heavy, they had to be supported by a second person. But they weren't just for show. They also had a practical use. They could be used as weapons in a pinch. Just imagine trying to fight off an attacker while wearing a giant golden necklace. Not easy, but hey, it's better than nothing. So you're probably wondering, if they had such cool stuff and were so fierce, why don't we hear more about them today? Well, the answer lies in their decline. Rome, with its massive army and love for taking over new places, gobbled up most of the Celtic lands, leaving only Ireland, Scotland, and Wales untouched. It's a sad tale of how sometimes, despite our best efforts, we can't escape the long arm of the big bad guy. In the end, the Celts didn't build an empire like the Romans or the Greeks, but their spirit lived on through their music, their myths, and their symbols carved into stone. They might be gone, but they're definitely not forgotten. And that brings us to the question: what surprised you the most about their customs, their gods, or maybe their fierce independence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're hungry for more history, don't forget to hit subscribe. We've got plenty of adventures waiting for us, from ancient Egypt to the Viking raids. Who knows? You might even learn something new. Thanks for joining me on this journey through time. Until next time, stay curious, keep asking questions, and remember, the past is never really gone. It's always a part of who we are.